So this is audio response to Adam Something's Right Libertarians Are Just Fascists. So the video is very, very flawed, so I'm going to try to explain it to you.
So what led me to this conclusion? Why do I think that libertarians, right libertarians to be specific, are fascists?
In a dissertation, you always start with definitions. This is not done here and shall not be done for the rest of the video.
But I did notice some worrying trends among people who call themselves that.
The question here is, what trends are you talking about?
And also, libertarianism has become an integral part of the Republican Party, which is a far-right party by any measure.
The description of the platform of the far right and the Republican Party is not developed in this video at all, so I don't know what to say to you, but he doesn't say anything about it.
So there appears to be some definite connection between the far-right and right libertarianism. I mean, theoretically, they're supposed to be on different ends of the spectrum. You know, right-wing authoritarians wanting more government control, at least in theory, and right libertarians wanting less.
The question is, control over what and why? Well, it's not really said here, so it's anyone's guess.
And so here we arrive at an absolutely crucial distinction. When I say right-wing libertarian, I don't mean people who fit the definition of right-wing libertarian.
What is the definition? You don't give it to us.
And so, do the following names sound familiar to you? Richard Spencer, Milo Yiannopoulos, Gavin McInnes, Tim Gionnet aka Baked Alaska, Stefan Molyneux, Ben Shapiro. All of these people are far-right demagogues.
I don't like any of these people, but when it comes to attacking people, it's called an ad hominem, and claims asserted without any proof can be dismissed without any proof. So fuck off with that shit.
All of them have either started out or are currently identifying as libertarian.
They could identify as attack helicopters or hybrid Nissan cars, I wouldn't care. Well, neither should you. Your attempt to gatekeep through ad hominems is pathetic. You should gatekeep through ideas and disqualifying their ideas. But you don't argue about ideas in this video, you just pretty much, well, assert and don't give any definitions of anything you talk about. The problem here is that you're conflating people like Ben Shapiro, who's just a conservative Jew, with people like Richard Spencer, who's like a crazy self-proclaimed white supremacist, or Stefan Molyneux, who's like a cult leader. Like, you're conflating all these people who have like very little in common, except thinking in their heads that there's something. Well, and you don't even cite them. Like, you could have shown us Mickey Mouse or Walt Disney as a picture and given us a random name. Well, I don't know, this is pathetic shit.
And so it seems to me that there is such a thing as the libertarian alt-right pipeline.
Here it's important to say what libertarian means. Libertarian means that your main value is liberty, which means the free choice of your actions over and your property. It's essentially property rights society-wide. I'll also tell you what fascism means. Fascism means by the state, for the state, everything within the state, which means that your economy is centrally planned and your choices are limited to the choices given to you by society. You can see how, for fascism, personal choice does not exist. You must only abide by what the state tells you to do, which is completely different from liberalism.
Well, if you're a libertarian, allegedly, chances are you will be against programs such as affirmative action, state welfare, anti-discrimination legislation. Now, do we see a pattern here?
The real question with such policies is whether or not they work. In the US, the war on poverty started in the 1960s, under the successor of JFK, Johnson. Thomas Sowell, a great economist, has proved beyond a doubt that such programs have failed. Teach a man how to fish, and he will eat for life. But give a man a fish and tell him to do nothing, and he shall remain poor and eventually starve to death anyway.
In general, it seems to me that far-righters and libertarians have an awful lot in common. And that's because they both believe in this thing called personal responsibility.
Do you know what? You are full of shit. And I'm going to quote you on that, because as you lie now about all of this, well, I'm going to put it now, and it's funny because it kind of reveals how badly you think about things and how illogical you are.
Oh, and by the way, I do believe in the importance of personal responsibility.
Adam essentially is going to criticize what personal responsibility is, and he's going to say that it's vague. And at the end of the video, suddenly, out of the blue, he reveals that he knew all along and that he believes in it himself. This is a confusing mess.
So when you tell young people that the cause of the trouble they see around them in the world, and maybe even the disquiet in their own heart, is the malevolent inadequacy of their society, that rings true. And they don't hear the rest of the story, and it's the rest of the story that I've been trying to tell. They don't hear the story that, yeah, don't forget about the evil and corruption that exists in your own heart.
Essentially, what Peterson is saying here is that broken people will fail if the system is broken or the system is fine. But the thing is, people who are successful and dynamic, they can succeed even in a broken system. A failing person who believes that they're perfect will blame everybody but themselves. And that's what's so interesting here, is that maybe the problem is systemic, but there can be an answer that comes from yourself. The game is rigged. It's unfair, fundamentally, but you don't have to hold yourself to the game. You can think outside of the box and you can solve your problems.
If you're a member of the left and you believe that all individuals are essentially just the outgrowths of institutions, and therefore that all change by individuals is going to be insufficient, and that it must be societal change that creates individual change, you're a threat, because you're telling people, well, the systems can certainly get better, but the main threat to you is you. And that is a deeply threatening message to people. And if people find fulfillment in that message, then the left really does have a problem, because if people start improving their lives within the system and not blaming the system for their problems, and instead recognizing that they can improve their lives, that's what members of the left hate most of all. You talk about in the book, Jordan, the fact that people are constantly coming up to you and they're saying things like, I was leading a dissolute life. I read your book. I started taking your advice and I've turned it around and now I'm doing much better in life. And, I'm blessed to have much the same experience from a lot of people who listen to the show, people who have been homeless, who now have graduated Harvard Law School, people who were single moms and then decided to take a college course and figure out their lives, people who have made mistakes and turned their mistakes around. And to me, those are inspirational stories. I think that, and change their life individually without putting all of their ire and focus on a system that the left is mainly focused on tearing down.
So there you have it. Individual responsibility means that we should solve big problems through small individual changes instead of systemic approaches.
Any big problem is just a sum of small problems. Essentially, you're telling us that you need a big solution to face a big problem. And your solution will be run by the state, and people will have no choice but to join it, which essentially means that the state will solve the problem for you. Even though every time this thing has been tried, it has failed horribly, you want to do it again. It's just crazy. Essentially, you are the fascist because you believe that the state can solve systematic problems when it doesn't. It never solves these problems. It never solves these problems at all. All it does is that slowly but surely, the state will take more and more power until you have no choice but to do whatever the hell the state wants you to do. It will be like China, where essentially everything is part of the state, and you have to answer everything you do to the state.
The system isn't broken, the individual people are.
Sometimes people are broken. Sometimes people need fixing, and fixing people is expensive. Might as well they fix themselves.
If you have 10,000 black people living in a ghetto somewhere, the systemic solution to black poverty would be targeted social programs, improving the infrastructure, enforcing laws against discrimination, and so on and so forth.
Unfortunately, such efforts have failed. Should we continue or should we stop? You are in the opinion that we should continue forever.
Whereas what Ben Personal Responsibility Shapiro would do is he would roll up in his Bentley and tell those people to start a business or something.
Wealth is just investment over time. Therefore, if these people invest over time within themselves and their community, they shall become wealthy.
Which is basically just the equivalent of hand-waving the issues of those people, like, yeah, whatever, just start a business or something. And that's because if you subscribe to the idea of personal responsibility, then chances are you believe that the system we have currently is fine or mostly fine.
Well, once again, you're full of shit because, as you say later on...
Oh, and by the way, I do believe in the importance of personal responsibility.
You're ascribing views that you hold to other people as something negative. You're trying to have your cake and eat it too.
And so the problems don't lie in the institutions, they lie in the individual people.
The thing is, problems lie in both. problems lie everywhere. We have to solve the problems at the individual level and at the societal level. But the thing is, it's much easier to tell people to be responsible for themselves and to work hard than it is to go and fight rich, affluent people who hold political power. You lived in a communist country. It took you 50 years to get rid of communism. 50 years it took to solve the systematical problem. It's much easier for people to become better, more responsible, develop their skills, invest in their community, and slowly usurp power from horrible despots that try to control everyone. Strong, independent people need institutions less, so in times of crisis, they give less power to them. Simply put, if people are strong and independent, they don't need institutions, they don't need things to be given to them. So that's why it's such a powerful message.
Hey, would you look at that? Sounds like these right-wing libertarians really want to conserve the current system. Wow, I wonder if there's a political movement dedicated to that exact goal. So yeah, basically if we follow the idea of personal responsibility, we end up invariably with conservative social policies. Quite a coincidence, isn't it? So if the darkies get too uppity in Detroit that they're poor and they have no opportunities, well, it's their problem. They're just lazy. They don't want to work. And if some soy-chugging cucked lefty points out that, hey, by the way, there's been systemic discrimination against black people, redlining policies, ramming highways through neighborhoods, you know, the disproportionate incarceration of black people for non-violent drug crimes, breaks up families and ruins communities, all of these concerns can be just hand-waved, dismissed with personal responsibility.
Once again, you misuse data. The black community has been receiving aid from the government since the 60s. Since the 60s, opportunities have been given to them. They've had positive discrimination in their favor for 50 years. Has it helped them? According to Thomas Sowell, it has not. It has made it worse. Communities that used to be rich are now poorer. And also, it has destroyed all the effort of the black community to help itself. There was a time in Harlem when Thomas Sowell lived and judges, lawyers, and hype were black. This has decreased severely.
Because you can just tell them, well, liberal, you say, let's say that black people are, let's say, discriminated against, but have you heard about this thing called personal responsibility? Yep, they can just move, or they can just create a business. They can just, let's say, stop being poor if they want to, but they don't. What does this mean about them? Right, so basically all social issues are channeled back onto the individual. If you see a bunch of black folk in a ghetto, your first question will not be what system produced this inequality, but rather, how come all these people are so lazy?
Working hard is not a sign of wealth. Working well is a sign of wealth. It's all about the choices you make. Somebody can sell a piece of paper on which he has scribbled his name and ask for $1 million, whereas a person can scrub toilets for years and get $10 pay. The value of work is completely different from where you are, when you are, and how well you negotiate. Blaming other people for negotiating very badly is not very productive. It is better to reflect on how to negotiate and use one of the many free resources you can get almost anywhere in the world.
And oh boy, does this result in some interesting follow-up questions. You know, how come all these black people seem to be unable to succeed in this meritocratic fair society created by white people? Is it a cultural problem or more of a biological problem? Hey, would you look at that? From one of the biggest foundational principles of libertarianism, we have organically arrived at white nationalist talking points. And this we call the libertarian alt-right pipeline. And the main issue of this libertarian idea of personal responsibility is that it's just so fucking vague.
You don't define it either. You are as vague as they are. You insult them, and then you do the same thing.
Oh, and by the way, I do believe in the importance of personal responsibility.
Once again, you're trying to eat your cake and have it too.
What does personal responsibility mean? In what sense? In what context? In what philosophical framework? And the answer is whatever you feel like. I mean, it's so vague it can be anything. That's the beauty of it.
You don't define it either. You are as vague as they are. You insult them, and then you do the same thing.
Oh, and by the way, I do believe in the importance of personal responsibility.
Once again, you're trying to eat your cake and have it too.
And this exact same thing happens to the other fundamental libertarian ideas, which are complete control over your person and your property. And so Christopher Cantwell, a speaker at the Unite the Right rally at Charlottesville, also known as the Crying Nazi, a former libertarian by the way, wrote the following in his blog following Charlottesville. People should be free to exercise complete control over their own person and property. If blacks are committing crimes or Jews are spreading communism, discriminating against them is the right of any property owner. The fact that he may or may not miss out on good blacks or Jews is a risk he takes, and the merit of his decisions will be proven out by the market. So once again, the ideas he takes as a basis are so vague that he can just...
You don't define it either. You are as vague as they are. You insult them, and then you do the same thing.
Oh, and by the way, I do believe in the importance of personal responsibility.
Once again, you're trying to eat your cake and have it too.
And so, if you are a person with empathy and a good understanding of the world, you realize that currently, in certain areas of life, especially in America, systemic change is needed to bring about more happiness and better outcomes. And that requires state social policies, anti-discrimination laws, affirmative action even, welfare programs, which will also go to a lot of non-white people due to their socioeconomic circumstances. In today's America, white people seem to have most of the power.
White people seem to have most of the power. That's a weird thing to say. I'm a poor American. All I have is a vote and a few skills. And you're telling me there is a group called whites I can join. This is essentially pure racism. There is no such group. Affluent people have power, and some of them happen to have white skin, notably in European countries and in the US. It's only one of the arbitrary characteristics they have. In other countries, those arbitrary characteristics usually align with the demographically most prominent group. For example, in China, people having a Chinese appearance are the majority group in powerful places. In Nigeria, it's Nigerians. Oh, isn't that interesting? And do you know what? Those people who have power, who are rich and affluent, usually they've invested a lot of resources in their person, as if they had been groomed by other people like their parents into these places of power. If only personal responsibility could be applied to everyone.
And if you tolerate the status quo, or who knows, maybe even support it, then it is quite simply in your best interest to side with political forces that are all about maintaining the current status quo. And would you look at that, libertarianism does exactly that.
Maintaining the status quo. What is the status quo exactly in this context? Some people are rich, others are poor, sometimes through mistakes they have made, other times through no fault of their own. Rules, policies, and programs may change, yet resources are limited, and the realm of politics is not a horn of plenty, but a game of trade-offs by rich and powerful people, which care little for the poor when they do not fear them outright. Benevolence and help are things people give to each other, and it is in short supply. People who make no effort won't be given much of it at all. A ride costs much more to the ghetto dwellers than to the rich in their gated communities. And that's why investment doesn't go to the ghetto.
So this is libertarianism from a social perspective, acting as an ideological platform for all kinds of unsavory folks on the far right. But hey, you might interject, libertarianism is not just that. It also has a lot to say about economics. It wants to free the markets, it wants more freedom for everyone, freedom to do business, freedom to buy or sell whatever they want. It's all about achieving liberty, free of any government meddling, hence the name libertarianism. It all sounds nice, but here's the problem. Hierarchy is inherent in capitalism.
Once again, you're full of shit. Hierarchies are inherent to capitalism? That's kind of two-faced from somebody who lived in a formerly communist country. Simply put, hierarchy is common to all social groups. Even animal groups have them. That's one of the main points Peterson makes in most of his interviews. Was the fucking lobster? Did you actually watch any of their videos? Or are you just talking out of your ass? And I'll remind you of this, but communist countries, those who have a centralized planned system, like China, the USSR and its satellite states, North Korea, and Venezuela, they have even worse corruption problems than most capitalist countries. Like, you have no choice in those countries. You have to follow people. Usually you don't believe in them. They're usually really corrupt. And it's kind of like Chernobyl. Haven't you seen Chernobyl? There's this like shoe salesman that's head of the nuclear commission, and he has no idea what he's doing. Like, at least in a capitalist system, this kind of thing doesn't happen. The worst people we have in the capitalist systems usually are elected people. Well, of course, sometimes there's some kind of corruption about like family ties, but like in communist systems, it's even worse. It's way worse because money is worthless in those systems. At least capitalist systems, money is worth something. There's no rations. I don't know. Like, it's just bad.
Your boss can be an incompetent dipshit who just got parachuted into his position through his relatives or something, and still have all the power over you, while you have no power over them.
The thing is, you can always tell your boss to go fuck himself. That's the whole point of capitalism.
And they can decide about your livelihood with a stroke of a pen. Capitalism is also coercive. What if your boss is a total, emotionally abusive dipshit who just makes employees' life a living hell? I've had those bosses before. It's not fun, and I ended up resigning in all situations.
So you agree that capitalism works. You can quit a job when it's shit.
But only because I had plenty of options.
This is moronic. Essentially, you have options because of capitalism. In systems which are not capitalism, and there are some systems that are not capitalist, like feudalism or communism, you cannot quit your job. You cannot quit your job in a system that's not capitalist. So no, you're wrong. All systems have hierarchy. All systems have hierarchy. It's just in capitalist systems, you have a choice. You can leave your job. You are what I call a hypocrite.
But what if I didn't? I would be screwed. I would have had to show up to work, take all the abuse with a smile on my face, and then pray to God I don't get fired, because if I do, I'm sleeping under the bridge. Right, so it seems to me that right-wing libertarianism is not really concerned with, liberty, and it's only used as a facade for the true agenda, which is the creation and maintaining of hierarchies. And that we call right-wing conservatism.
Maintaining hierarchies is just maintaining hierarchies. Conservatism is maintaining traditions. Traditions do not always enforce hierarchies. Actually, sometimes traditions actually do the opposite. Once again, you do not define your terms. The problem here is that you're disingenuous, because the big thing about hierarchies is that hierarchies form because there are rules. Conservatism just wants to maintain the rules that enable hierarchies to form. And the thing is, when you're a libertarian, it's not incompatible, because libertarians just want people to be able to engage. They want everybody to have the same rules. And when you're like, yes, those people, they want to keep the traditional rules, it's not incompatible at all with liberty. Like, I don't know what these things mean in your head, but you're a confused mess. But the important thing here is that without capitalism, without the freedom to do whatever the hell you want, there is no discussion. Your ideas are always about central planning. You don't understand what freedom means.
Which happens to be a precursor to right-wing fascism. And a few years ago this would have been a rather outlandish statement. However, since then we had the Republican Party's hard shift towards the far right.
I know ignorance is common in your video, but the Republican Party has always been far right. I remember when I was young, and they went to conquer all of the Middle East with tanks and guns. Isn't that far right already? They were very religious and very traditional. They've always been in the far right. I'm sorry, but Trump actually is less far right than somebody like Bush. You're just ignorant.
4 years of Donald Trump, we had Charlottesville and the very fine people on both sides. And then we had the attack on the Capitol, which was essentially a coup attempt by Trump supporters, and came about as a result of Donald Trump questioning the result of a legitimate democratic election, with most of the Republican Party's backing, by the way. So that's why I'm so comfortable calling right-wing fascism a natural and logical continuation of right-wing conservatism.
Your link between conservatism and fascism is not proven. Your logic is flawed. Contesting elections doesn't mean you're fascist, because in fascism it's a one-party system. Don't you remember communist country in which you lived? Because contesting elections is a sign of a healthy democracy. Also, random people being let in to government building and making a mess is not a coup. A coup actually involves killing your leaders or making them resign, which did not happen. Politicians weren't even in the building when those random protesters came in. And I say protesters because none of them have a riot charge, and some of them are even in jail without bail or a fair trial.
Because as conservatism transitions towards the far right, it becomes less and less distinguishable from right-wing fascism, the symptoms of which I believe are there for anyone to see. And that is why right-wing libertarians always turn out to be fascists. Oh, and by the way, I do believe in the importance of personal responsibility. I think we should all be responsible for our actions. I think no one on the left is seriously saying that we shouldn't. Only that next to the very important personal responsibility, we should have systemic solutions for systemic problems. That's my view as well, and I think it's completely fair.
So the solution to personal problems is not working on your person, it is central planning, which is in fact the basis of fascism, which is everything was in the state, for the state, by the state. This has been a very long video, but I must remind you that when you're talking about things, you have to define them, because in your head, they don't mean the same thing as in other people's heads. So you have to tell us what they mean. You didn't define fascism, you didn't define libertarianism correctly. At least it's not very clear. And then you conflate both of them when they're completely opposite. And even the people who believe in them, the people you criticize, the people you attack with ad hominem attacks, they would never conflate them in such a way. Otherwise, you would have put the clip in the video. You put a clip of Jordan Peterson, which explains exactly his point. He says sometimes not only is the system broken, but the people are broken too. And broken people have difficulties fixing themselves. They can rarely actually fix a system. So that was the main point he was making. And you just sidestepped it and you just went crazy and you just conflated everything that's not central planning as bad. I'm sorry, you lived in the communist system. You should know that central planning is bad. You should know that central planning has as many faults as personal responsibility. And the worst thing is you're a complete hypocrite because you say, personal responsibility is vague, and then you admit that yourself, you believe in it. So you're like, this is vague bullshit, and then you're like, and I agree. It's just pathetic, man. It's pathetic. I'm sorry, but I see propaganda in what you do because you insult people without quoting them. You don't explain your ideas. I'm sorry. I grew up in countries where you could actually see what people said before they were criticized, and this is pretty much bullshit, man.